Aloha Art Addicts, Kira here and Bug. Today we are working on Van Gogh's Yellow Sunflower. I'll take you through all the steps on how to paint this piece. And if you need to still see the video on supplies, it's in a video previous to this one. The video previous to this one is the tutorial on how to paint Van Gogh's Yellow Sunflowers, the big bunch of yellow flowers with the yellow wall. So that one is before this one. That one is also more in-depth. This one is a little bit more concise, and a big shout out to Pamela and her students for requesting this video. If you've already chosen your reference material, you're going to either Sharpie marker your grid lines onto your image like this, or you can use one of the ones that are downloadable from my blog or from my website that already have the grid on them. This is just done with the computer generation, and a pen is just fine. What you're going to want to do is create, at the minimum, 4 quadrants across the top and 6 quadrants down. If your reference material is landscape, it will just be the opposite, 6 across and down. This will help you to show what goes where. After you do this, or after you get the grid on your reference material, you're going to create that same grid on your canvas. This will help everything to aggrandize or minimize at the proper ratio, whether you use a smaller canvas than this sheet of paper or a larger one. After that, you're going to begin to draw. Just take lightly a pencil and just sketch in what goes where based on your quadrants. So your quadrants is your map. You're going to see where each of those blossoms of the sunflowers go, where the vase starts and ends, where your table is, where your horizon line is, and where those leaves are. So you're just going to roughly sketch in your reference or your subject. You don't need to go into any detail. That will come with the painting. Okay? Welcome back to the Labatube. Our first task, now that we have everything drawn out, is to do the background. Our background is kind of a really neat teal blue color. Mind you, you can change your color background if you like. You can even change the color of the vase, the color of the table. So you as an artist can now see maybe what you would want to change and go for it. For this tutorial, we're going to stick with what Van Gogh did. We're going to take a nice teal blue and we're going to cover that background. Now, Van Gogh was very loose in his use of the brush. He didn't do a lot of blending. So I'm just going to get our background in. Now, Van Gogh loved a lot of texture, so I left a lot of big, broad brushstrokes on there without painting them away or into each other. Now, that might not be a style that you like. You're welcome to do it the way you like it. Now I'm going to switch colors. I'm moving along from my background, where I used a very large brush. Larger area requires a larger brush. I'm going to use that same brush carrying down into the bottom of the table. Now I'm going to let this section of the table dry. In my reference material, there are beautiful strokes of a reflective yellow and pink and blue and green and purple. I'm going to wait to do those until my table dries. My table, I made sure, had a bit of a darker edge at the top, which helps to give your viewer perspective that the table is receding back in space. So just give it a little darker line at the top than the rest of the table. The same thing goes for the bottom of the vase. The bottom of the vase would have a bit of a shadow, being that it's on top of the table. So continue that same darkness that you took for the top of your table to create that perspective for the bottom of your vase. Moving on to the vase, I'm going to keep it the color that Van Gogh did it. He liked this beautiful bright green, and it's a beautiful contrast because the leaves of the vase of the bouquet are rather dead, so they have a much more neutralized green. Now we're going to take it to the vase. Now the vase is green and white. I have had students choose to make this vase pink and white, purple was one student. You're welcome to make it any color that you like. It is two-toned, which we love. He's using a nice, beautiful, vibrant green for the top, which is really, really nice. My green's a little bit transparent, so I'm going to make sure I add a little bit of white into it to give that opacity or better coverage. Now, Van Gogh also added a bit of color in there. There is some blue in there, so you can take some of that same color as your background and put it in there. He did add some yellow into there. He has a nice dark green under those beautiful blossoms. So you want to make sure that you bring that dark green into there. What this shows your viewer is that there is shadow shapes underneath where those blossoms are. That it's a bit darker, that they're leaning over the vase and creating that shadow shape. Now that we've got our vase on, you're going to do the same thing that you kind of created with that table. You're going to create a bit of a darker edge to that vase so that you can show your viewer that that shape is receding into space. So just make sure that the edge of the vase receives just a nice little touch. It doesn't have to be too strong. A nice touch of a darker version of your green that you're using for the vase. Next, you're going to be using a green, a neutralized green, maybe mixed with a little bit of ochre, so you kind of get a muddy green, to work on your leaves. Your leaves are a nice dark army green, and then that kind of muddy green mixed in for the lighter areas to show the viewer that the leaves are rolling forward. Now, while I've had that dark color green, I've gone in and kind of done all the areas of the dark green. This is because this is all behind your blossoms, or the petals of your blossoms. So they don't really need to be, they can be thought of later because they're going to come in later. But we need to make sure that these leaves behind them happen first and dry before our blossoms need to go on. So I've kind of done almost everything except for the browns and yellows. The first thing we're going to work on is the inside of the flowers, and then we will work on the petals afterwards. So in your mind, you're constantly thinking, what's behind what comes first in space, and you're always painting furthest in perspective to closest in perspective. Now, I did all of that with the really, really large brush. Sometimes I just forget to change brushes. But usually smaller areas will use smaller brushes. So you can see here you have an array, pointy, chisel, flat, whatever is useful to you. I'm usually a palette knife painter. I paint with a knife. So I enjoy like household brushes and very large tools. But as you get into smaller shapes, you tend to use a smaller brush. Larger shapes or background areas, use your larger brush. Moving into the blossoms, the background of the blossoms or the under layers of the blossoms are rather brown. So you're going to mix your brown maybe with a little bit of ochre so you kind of get a nice soft brown. And we're going to take it into the middle of the blossoms. This is just your background. All the seed work or all of the shapes that the seeds are will come on top of that once this is dry. This blossom has a bit less brown in it, a bit more red undertones. All of its petals are completely gone. It's gone to seed. And so it's ready to just kind of burst off all of its little sunflower seeds. So the underneath is rather orange than brown. So we're just going to use a bit more red in our mixture. So red plus your yellow will give you a nice orange. I added just a little bit of that red into the other blossoms. Each blossom is very different, which is probably why he chose this subject in the first place, because he had 3 blossoms at the different 3 stages of life. But I did add some of that red that I had made for our premier blossom, our little princess blossom here, to create some relatability. So creating relatability in your painting is really fun. It means you take a little bit of your background blue and you add a little bit into your vase, the way Van Gogh did. So if you look at his piece, there is some blue in there of the background, where he just used that same color, pulled it into his vase, and put it in there. Creating relatability throughout your piece like that, where your viewer can see recognizable patterns of color, is really interesting for your viewer. Currently, we're going to wait for these blossoms to dry. We're going to come down onto our table now that it's dry, and we're going to create some really fun reflective colors that you can see in your reference material. Can you guys hear bugs snoring? She's totally snoring. All right, so now I've got that fun reflective colors coming up off of the countertop. So what that is the lacquer layer of the table is reflecting the colors of the sunflowers in the vase. So you see those, all the same colors that you've been using here. I did nice big strokes. One secret to this is when you're putting a light color over a dark color like this, such as these yellows and pinks and oranges, you're going to want to add some white into your paint. Not all the paints are opaque. A lot of them are very transparent, so just putting a color over this brown won't show up at all. So make sure you add some white in there. Now we're going to go up to our blossoms. I'm going to start off with some dark blossoms first, let those dry, and then come on with some light blossoms and really make them pop. All right, so that was the inside of the blossoms as well as the petals. I'll show you a closer up photo of this. Now is your chance to kind of go back and see where you'd like to fix things. Maybe some of the petals you want them to be brighter, so adding more white to making them opaque. Maybe taking a bit of a darker green here just to retrace my lines of my leaves to really kind of show my viewer where those leaves really are actually going. Anything you want to go back in and just touch up, go for it. Now is your chance. Everything in the background should be pretty much dry. Your table is pretty much dry. So if you're ready to sign it,